And so we are in this place where our values have become stripped away for the sake of ratings, for the sake of someone's political agenda, and into this vacuum of information comes someone like Rush Limbaugh and Bill O'Reilly and now Rick Sanchez, and the idea of media organizations is cover your ass. Don't do anything that's going to upset people more than is absolutely necessary. Or if you're going to upset them in the right way. So what you have is, you have the ranters and you have the screamers, but you don't have what Bill Kovach and Tom Rosenstiel describes as proportionality. How does this serve an audience? And so Bill and Tom talked about a few ideas, and I'll just list them off, and then we can maybe have a little chat about them, or anything you like. They ask the real existential questions. What is journalism for? Is it for ratings? Is it to create moral panic? Is it to treat the audience as citizens first and consumers of media second? What is the truth? We are now in a very strange place in journalism, where the idea of opinion has become more important than fact-based reporting. And so the truth is, everybody's got his or her version of it, but no one has any proof, or there's less proof around. So as Stephen Colbert refers to it, truthiness becomes more of an apparent value than the truth itself. Who do journalists work for? Doug Mitchell, who many of you know, and I talked about this, gets back to Rick Sanchez and the Jewish media conspiracy. Yeah, there's lots of Jews in media. Partly that's because starting back in the 20th century, they couldn't get jobs in mainstream media organizations. Thomas Edison wouldn't allow Jews to work in the film business in New York, so they went to Hollywood and created a world of their own. Yes, there are Jews in the media business, but do Jews, in fact, control the editorial definition of news, or is there something else going on? My sense, which Doug and I talked about for hours, was that the problem is that it's not that we couldn't organize, as they say in England, a piss up in a brewery. We're not that organized. We're a very chaotic bunch of people. We're actually the last libertarians. Journalists don't want anyone to tell them what to do. They'll do what they have to do to keep their jobs. We've all done that. But they're really kind of anarchistic in some essential way. What Doug and I concluded was that media organizations, like hires like, we're comfortable with people who share our values, have the same experiences, maybe have gone to similar kinds of schools, can talk the talk. And getting back to NPR, we discovered back in the 90s, we were going out and we've got to hire more black people, and so we did, and they were gone in 6 months. What was the problem of retention at NPR? The problem of retention was that they didn't feel at home. They didn't have that sense of collegiality because this whole notion of like hiring like had permeated so far into it that it was impossible to tear it out. So we needed, and we created a system of mentoring and a system of debriefing to get a sense of how people were fitting in. It wasn't just enough to hire them, throwing them in the deep end of the journalistic pool and saying, if you can't swim in 6 months, you're gone. We had to do a better job. Journalism is about verification, so that Rick Sanchez or Bill O'Reilly or whomever, Michael Savage, who's aptly named, can go on the radio or the television and say whatever he thinks. There's no accountability. How do media organizations keep these people journalistically reliable, as opposed to being just sensationalistic? Bill and Tom talked about independence from faction. We should not be beholden to anyone. Our goal is to figure it out, to be sense makers for a public that dying for some contextual information that they're not getting. They're not getting. To monitor power, to keep an eye on government, to be watchdogs, to keep them honest, to be a public forum, to be a convener of ideas from various communities. I was very lucky. Last summer, the State Department asked me to go to West Africa to help train journalists in 2 countries in preparation for elections, Niger and Guinea, the 2 poorest countries in the world. I'd never been to sub-Saharan Africa, I'd been to North Africa, but it was fantastic. One of the things that we did on this idea of engaging the public in a public way, they had never had a free election since independence in '58 from France. These are French-speaking ex-colonies from France. There's a low level of literacy. There are no newspapers. Men have a literacy rate of 20%, women about 10%. Nobody can afford a television, but radio is king. And so we said, how do we mobilize radio to get people energized about an election? We went to the public radio service in Guinea, and they said, oh no, if we say the wrong thing and somebody gets in that doesn't like us, we're dead. And literally, they could be dead. So we went to the commercial FM stations. There's no national network, but there's a lot of them because they're cheap to run. We said, would you help us? And they said, we'd be glad to. This, to me, was really interesting, that public broadcasting couldn't step up, but commercial broadcasting could. And we created, for the election, a network of about 80 stations. And we said, okay, what are the issues here? The issues are fear, intimidation, violence. There's been a horrible event that occurred September before where a pro-democracy demonstration was put down by the Presidential Guard. 150 people were murdered and hundreds of women were raped in the streets of Conakry. We had to figure out a way to protect these people. We came up with the idea that because so many young people have cell phones, let them text us when they see something wrong, when they see examples of intimidation or fraud. And we would guarantee anonymity, which we could do. And we started to broadcast that on this FM network. They held the election. There was an 80% turnout and no violence. This is how people want to be involved, not just in West Africa, but I think everywhere. They want an opportunity to make their lives better. And journalism, media, have an obligation to do that. We need to be engaged with the most relevant ideas, not the most supercilious and idiotic. I know. And to figure out how do we make the important interesting and the interesting important. That's always going to be our challenge. How do we make sure that we're being proportional in our coverage? You know, you can say, like Fox News does, you know, we decide, you choose, or whatever the phrase is. You choose, we decide, something like that. The proportionality is you have some wingnut here and you have another one there, and they've done a job of service to journalism by putting those out, when the proportionality, the reality is more, maybe it's here to here. And we have to be able to say to our ratings-craving bosses, you know, you're getting this wrong. This is a disservice. And finally, conscience. Your conscience as journalists counts for a lot. What I've said to my students is that, and what I said to the folks in Detroit yesterday, so when you walk into the newsroom in the morning, what are you leaving outside? You're coming in, you're leaving outside a lot of things, probably. Everybody does, because you're now a professional journalist, and so you can't talk about the things that are important to you. We don't want you to deform your journalism. We'd like you to inform your journalism. By being able to talk a little bit about your experiences that can help people understand the world. One of the journalists at WDET in Detroit yesterday said, well, I'm legally blind. And people looked at him and said, we didn't know that. And they've been working with him for years. He has no rods and cones in his eyes. He was born without them. He can sort of see like there and there, but that's it. So and everything is kind of monochromatic. What about using that reporter in a way that helps inform stories we do about people with disabilities? Wouldn't that add something to the story? If I come to work and I say, you know, I've got a gay brother, should I not have said that? Maybe it could help me do stories on discrimination. There's something, we're missing a lot here. And the thing that we started talking about yesterday is that we need to see our news organizations not as fortresses. You know, we'll tell you what's going on, we'll go out, get the story, we'll chop and change it, and then we'll send it back out to you, and you better believe it or else. My metaphor for media now is that we should be a porous membrane where we're letting things flow out, but we're also allowing things to come in. And to use that concept of the porous membrane to serve our core audiences, but to reach out to audiences that we've never touched before. Bill Kling from Minnesota Public Radio 5 years ago came up with a brilliant idea that he called public insight journalism. I beg you to steal it. It is the greatest use of journalistic vibes and values that I've encountered for years. He called the newsroom in and he said, in the way that Dick Salant shocked his newsroom back in the 80s, he said, every story you do, there's someone out there who knows more about it than you do. Get that person in the story. And of course the newsroom said, well, wait a minute, Bill, you know, we're the professionals, they don't know anything, they're just amateurs, they should be listening to us, we're the authorities. And Bill said, in so many words, the idea that we are gatekeepers is gone. Because with the internet, there's no more gate. There isn't even a fence. And so they started sending out messages to their audience on their website. Even a website sounds fortress-like, doesn't it? Why has Northwest Airlines, which has a hub in Minneapolis-St. Paul, why is it contracting out all of its maintenance to Costa Rica? So they got 400. They got 400 emails back from employees, ex-employees, disgruntled ex-employees, gruntled ex-employees. You know, the whole range. And the story wasn't that necessarily that Northwest Airlines was a bad corporate citizen. The story was that the state of Minnesota had stopped educating people in aeronautics. And there were no trained aeronautical technicians in the entire state. That became the story. And so that's when you talk, but you can't do these stories unless you push our news organizations to give us the headspace to do them. Otherwise, we're just going to get bloviators like poor old Rick Sanchez and push him further and further out until he falls off and then fire him. And that's what's going to happen increasingly unless we all take a stand to say that our audiences deserve better and we as journalists have too much dignity to allow it to happen.